Toronto, this is John Keogh, and welcome to the Future of Food 10 by 10 CEO series, where I speak to 10 CEOs for 10 minutes to get their perspectives on what's happening in the food industry and what their companies or organizations are doing about that. And today, in episode number 10, I'm delighted to have Dr. Peter Stevens, the CEO of GS1 New Zealand. Hello, Peter.
Kia ora, as we would say in New Zealand, John.
Peter, delighted to have you. And in 1 minute, can you give us a quick overview of you, who you are, and also the elevator pitch on GS1 New Zealand?
So I'm the CEO of GS1 New Zealand. I've been here for about 15 years. I've got a background in standards and IT. And GS1 New Zealand is one of the 115 sister organisations as part of the GS1 Federation. We're a not-for-profit, all of us, standards bodies with services that help the supply chain work smoothly, representing almost 2 million businesses globally.
Wonderful. And Peter, what are you seeing happening within New Zealand, for specific to New Zealand? What are the issues that the food industry has, and how is GS1 trying to address those issues?
Well, I think if we look at, obviously New Zealand being an exporting country and importing, we're at the end of the start or the end of a very long supply chain, is actually influenced by what's happening globally. If we look globally, what GS1's task is really to assist our members to scalably support customer needs, particularly around digital information, around their food, development of standards-based traceability, support for authentication and protection against food fraud. Now, locally, how does that play out? Well, we're working with our member organisations, industry and government agencies to implement GS1 standards, support, hopefully synergistically, the government's export agenda. Now, the export agenda is very important for New Zealand, as you would guess, because our primary sector exports, that's food and fibre, make up a lot of our exports, other than perhaps things like education and tourism. So we really need to get market access and command a premium price. So we also have some very specific challenges that came as a result of Fonterra had New Zealand's biggest company, Fonterra had a high profile recall, which actually turned out to be false, around botulism in 2013. And there's been a whole flurry of regulatory changes where I think New Zealand got a bit of a surprise about how some of our systems weren't quite as good as we might have thought.
So what kind of services are GS1 New Zealand delivering to industry to help them on the domestic market and help them prepare for exports to target markets like China?
Well, I suppose firstly, GS1's strength is in identification. So we provide identification for products, obviously, of course, and we have a very high penetration in New Zealand in the market. We also provide partnership with the government, the legal entity identification based on the global location number for every business in New Zealand. That's regardless of type, companies, trusts, legal, government departments, not-for-profit, sole traders. Everybody has a globally unique number provided by GS1 in collaboration with the government. What we also then provide is services that lay over the top of that, which provide, for example, recall support. Now, that doesn't extend globally, but we provide, and that's probably one of the challenges, is the government of New Zealand requires compliance with their systems, which are mainly government to government for traceability and things, and they're not based on global GS1 standards. And so what we're working is to try to make those government to government processes interoperate better with what business to business uses, particularly in offshore markets. I think I look at it pretty simplistically. We don't have the ability to put food on our plate unless consumers in other countries buy our product. So we need to be focused on what they need. And what's very clear is that the level of information and the confidence, to buy with confidence, the level is stepping up with overseas consumers.
And so Peter, when you look in New Zealand and you look at the food industry in particular, how advanced are they in the area of product traceability and the ability to recall a product effectively from the market?
Well, if we tackle the second one first, recalls in New Zealand, we are very sophisticated. About 95% of all food products are fully supported recalls and withdrawals, trade withdrawals, via a service that GS1 provides on cost recovery of industry. In fact, John, you know this very well because it started life with you in Canada. It was the archetype for the globe, and it's a pioneering service really, and we have very good coverage. That unfortunately does not extend into offshore markets. That's a different issue because of the different regulators, but certainly we have very good capability there. Traceability, the government requires traceability, but that's primarily focused on getting an export certificate. And I think this is where if I was to be harsh, we have a challenge. I think that gap in Kiwi consumers are pretty trusting. We trust our food, it's good. New Zealand food is good. We think that, we take that approach to the world. Unfortunately, the rest of the world is increasingly skeptical about claims like that, and they're looking for substantiation. This is an area that I think New Zealand, apart from some of our top exporters like Zespri and Fonterra, I think we need to step up.
Gotcha. And Peter, in the area of data and data accuracy and data governance, can you talk a little bit about that, or how you're approaching it in New Zealand? Because if we don't have the data right, if it's not accurate, it'll really mess things up, you know, in technology and also in business-to-business environments. What are you doing specifically around the areas of data?
Well, I think if we stand back, John, and we say, what is GS1's core value proposition? And the easiest way to understand this is if you're an organization that controlled your entire supply chain from initiation to the consumer, then you don't need to bother with standards. But the moment that you're in an open supply chain, you need to have a common language for business so that you can expedite and flow data through and hopefully at reasonable cost. That's where we start off with. And if you think about the initiation of a transaction, after negotiation, most people start off with something that resembles a purchase order, where you send saying, this is what I would like to buy at this, what I think is the agreed price in this number of units. If that's not right, my view of what the price would be, for example, or your product is incorrect, we have a misalignment, then we're ending up with a lot of trouble further down, reconciliation issues. So good data about what it is that you're trying to sell me, right, to a fine level, is clearly fundamental and a platform to build off. And this is why data synchronization, GS1 has a huge focus on this, data synchronization and data quality. That provides the ability to build transactions right through to the actual delivery and hopefully being paid on top of a good solid platform. Too often though, people don't have a good platform, a solid platform of data quality to build off for, and so business processes run into trouble and cost goes up.
So building onto that then, Peter, how important is it to get the data right before you can start talking about things like interoperability?
I think it's absolutely critical. And I think this is why I must give real credit to the New Zealand government, where they saw that unique legal entity identification would become a foundational component for an electronic world, and particularly for New Zealand, where we have to globe. And that's why, after a very robust process, they partnered with us and adopted the global location number standard for every business in New Zealand, you know, 2.5 million businesses. They recognise that fundamental building block of an electronic world, and trust and traceability, transparency and electronic purchase order to cash needs to be built off good identification.
Wonderful. Peter, in the last 30 seconds, if you're up in front of 50 new startup companies in New Zealand, what advice would you give the CEOs?
I think and perhaps design in from the get-go how you would deliver at lowest possible cost to an overseas consumer a coherent story about provenance, attributes and the values embedded in your product. Too often that's not the case. People don't think that in and design it in from the start. That's what I would suggest. And by the way, I'm not talking about television commercials and above the brand. I'm talking about the story as in how would you deliver digitally a story 24/7 by 365 days. So
wonderful. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to thank Peter Stevens, Dr. Peter Stevens from GS1 New Zealand. And thank you so much, Peter, for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, John.
Cheers.